Hello everyone who is listening. If you are familiar with the show, you know that this is not normally how we do it, but seeing as we are between seasons 2 and 3 right now, I figured I would get some interesting bonus between season content, as I normally do. And today, any of you who have read the title of this very episode know that we have among us someone who is proverbially a living legend among podcasters, who has single-handedly redefined the way anthology horror is done, and whose influence is still rippling across the interwaves right now. You can hear it in so many different anthology horror podcasts because he is something of a figure to those of us who work in the field. I'm, of course, talking about the one, the only Soren Narnia, who I've got speaking with me today. It's the man responsible for the creation of Knifepoint Horror, one of the most successful anthology horror podcasts, alluded to by plenty and plenty of people, and easily one of my favorite shows to ever be made. Soren, how are you doing today?
I'm terrific. What an introduction. Thank you.
No problem at all. And for those of you who don't know, like I said, Soren Narnia, he has a podcast entitled Knifepoint Horror. It is some of the most chilling and some of the most deep-cutting stories that you can find in a podcast, and stories, I think, that go beneath just the surface of horror and beneath just the I suppose, surface experience of fear, and kind of delve more into the psychological underlying aspects of it, dabbling in a little subgenres here and there, kind of at will, with some tremendous artistic liberty that I respect and just enjoy all the way. And to start with a pretty preliminary question, something you've probably gotten a lot, but I am curious, so how did Knifepoint Horror specifically start? Why did you decide to go in the direction of podcasting?
I had just really heard of podcasting popping up around 2009, 2010, and around that time I was getting kind of frustrated with the old traditional publication model. I got very discouraged very fast. I have no patience for anything, and I'm very lazy. And this podcasting thing, when I looked into it, I thought, it seems like if I record a story, whatever that genre might be, I can simply put it out there, and then I will have a sense of closure. At the very least, I'll be done. I can not stick something in a drawer and wonder, will anything ever come of it? Podcasting was just a way to kind of put a period at the end of the creative sentence, sort of. And then that immediately was very satisfying. Immediately, I thought, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that interesting. I think there is a lot of liberty in the, really for best term, internet-based storytelling. I think a lot of people have taken that into their hands. It interests me to hear you say that, because you do come from a writing background, from what I understand. And so do you feel you've kind of gained a little bit of, I guess, freedom over industrial pressures, it seems like?
Yeah, I think so. I do like kind of doing the independent thing and experimenting. And fortunately, no one's beating down the door to change the way I do things or ask for something different. So I really have had the freedom to just roll out in my own imagination, and that is really the best. The day that would stop that would be the sad day.
Yeah, no doubt. I think all of your listeners will go ahead and agree with that. Knifepoint Horror, it is an anthology horror podcast, and there are a couple of different shows out there, Old Gods of Appalachia, the Magnus Archives, some shows out there that are anthology horror but still have a shared universe. And something that interests me about Knifepoint Horror is that there is no explicitly shared mythos, like explicitly declared mythos that all these stories share, and the things that happen are usually strange and kind of merging horror with surrealism. You don't exactly know what it is you're afraid of sometimes when listening to these stories. And so I'd be interested to hear you comment on the way that ambiguity plays a role in there.
Yeah, to me, the primal fear is what I'm after, and that, of course, is the fear of, my God, why is this happening to me? What is coming for me? And if you, as an individual, can't answer those questions, that's where things are really scary. Hard to me is the lack of information. If you're told exactly what's haunting you or how to get rid of it, you just can't. That's not scary to me. What's really petrifying is to have something terrible happen to you for a reason. You think it's for a reason, but you cannot know. You're scratching and clawing to find what that is. That to me is the primal fear. Like it's been said many times by many writers. It's the fear of the unknown. See, the ambiguity I like because you get to play around in that. To write a character and just abandon them with misinformation, with confusion. Oh, it's such fun to watch them suffer.
That is, I enjoy hearing you say that. You've echoed many a fellow horror artist, I think, in those words. A question that is perhaps a little less deep running, but is still consistently I've been curious about. The podcast art for Knifepoint Horror, what exactly is that image?
So that is a very teeny tiny corner, and you'll see it if you look at the whole painting of the larger Hieronymus Bosch work, Garden of Earthly Delights. It's a horrifying painting. So I don't know how – I was looking at that online one day, and I don't know how I spotted that little teeny tiny creature who I call Gavin. It just kind of like hiding in one of the – I think it's the lower right-hand corner. So I just helped myself to that, and yes, people really do seem to like that. It is kind of – I think the way the podcast has changed over the last 10 or 12 years, to me that is still a mighty creepy image. I have no regrets about putting that up time after time.
Yeah, nor should you, I think. What was it about the painting in specific that spoke to you? Was it just a frightening image, or what was the inspiration?
It was this weird mix of the bestial and the human face, kind of like a 50-50 thing going on there, and the minimalism of that mouth. Not a mouth full of fangs, just a couple, and just enough detail to suggest things, but not go overboard. Which is kind of like the way I like to write things. Just kind of matched up perfectly.
Seems fitting enough.
I don't know why it has a Kleenex over its head, but I can't answer all these questions.
Always did wonder about that. Another thing about Knifepoint Horror that listeners will recognize, those who have listened to the show over the long term and listened to multiple episodes, is that there are a few motifs in there, and then one of them is a lot of deserted towns, a lot of deserted old towns or decrepit, like specifically abandoned cities. And this is something I noticed in a lot of the different episodes, and I'm wondering why that is. Is that just a thing? Why is that a thing you consistently find yourself coming back to?
I think it's kind of just an easy scare technique to clear out the area. I want to isolate the characters as much as I possibly can, and that is the creepy town, the creepy abandoned part of a city. That is something that you can't help but run into in your daily life. So we do start to absorb, all these collected images and sounds. So I do have this sort of interior library of that, and to me, there are very few things eerier than being in a town and it's like, okay, where is everybody? Why am I on this block and shouldn't I be hearing traffic? I drive around a great deal, just exploring little small towns, areas. So I'm always looking for that fix. But yeah, it just seems to really put a character in a frightening situation. Step one for me is get rid of the other human beings as much as you possibly can, and create the sense that within every house, who knows what's going on. Create that sense of paranoia.
Yeah, it's funny because, like I said, there are a lot of shows. Old Gods of Appalachia, for example, takes place in the Appalachian region. And when trying to think of, I guess, the collective setting of Knifepoint Horror, Deserted Towns was first what came to mind. And that kind of actually segues me onto my next question. Like I said, Knifepoint Horror is a show that does not have at least an explicitly declared shared mythos. But I do recall you once beginning a story by saying, I believe it was the first trilogy of horror, you began it by first saying, though not quite Knifepoint Horror, is what you said. And that made me think, what is Knifepoint Horror? What exactly defines that? So what value would you say these stories deliver both individually and collectively? What is it that ties them together into one show or makes them worthy of grouping together?
That's kind of a tough one because things have changed over the years and they keep changing actually more and more as they go along. Originally, it was really, someone referred to it as sort of isolation horror. Was going for just the primal sense of being alone and afraid against some sort of unstoppable terror. There's nothing more than that. And in the way it was written, I wanted to really capture that cadence of one person telling a story, maybe in a bar, maybe in the corner of a party, and just being very casual first person. But then things began to change, and I think it was really, might have been just creative boredom. I thought, well, I've been doing this for about 5 or 6 years. There's now a lot of good horror like this out there. What else can I do? And I began to be interested in maybe adding some psychological layers, some different themes to the horror. And now it's sort of anything goes. I like to just really shoot for the moon in every single one of these episodes and work in plots, subplots, themes, touch other genres, experiment with the format. It's gotten a little bit all over the place. So the only thing really, I think, that ties all these stories in to the concept of Knifepoint Horror is that I take them very seriously. I take horror, when I write it, I take it extremely seriously. There's no funny business. Not a lot of comic relief or even kitsch in mine. That and the name, and there's almost nothing else. I think there's been sort of an evolution going on for some time. It's what it's really about is just taking horror very seriously in the end.
Well, I commend and respect you for doing that, because anybody who is a fan of horror knows that it is a genre notoriously not taken seriously. So I certainly respect that approach. And it's also, I respect the freedom there too, because I feel like something a lot of podcasters, Lisa, I've talked to, and even I myself have kind of struggled with, is the idea of wanting to change the show, wanting to keep it interesting, but feeling like you can't deviate from the goal that you've set kind of in the beginning. But when listening to Knifepoint Horror, I can tell you seem to kind of make whatever you want out of it, and I think that's what I and many other people enjoy about the show, is that there's a liberty involved there. And it's very palpable.
It's not by design or anything. I have no plan. I have no goal. It's just when I wake up, I think I just don't really enjoy doing something that I feel like I've done exactly that same way before. It's just not fun to me anymore. The only thing fun is like, let me twist this, let me tweak this a little bit, let me do something a little bit different than last time. So it's a slow process to get there. So we'll see where it winds up.
Yeah, for sure. Another motif that I've noticed throughout Knifepoint Horror is that there's a lot of substance abuse in these stories. There's a lot of characters who are addicts and who kind of find themselves at the mercy of substance. And I'm wondering what the motif is there, why that keeps coming back.
I found, there's a lot of people who are addicted to something, or their lives have just gone off the rails, or their lives just kind of disappoint them. I've noticed. I think it's I'm not sure why any specific issue keeps getting touched upon. There's mental illness, that tragic element. And to me, I just think I see life as this very, very dark business, really, that we're all just kind of struggling through. And these motifs just make it in. And when I think of a character, I immediately think of, they have to have, they just seem to have some sort of problem. And I actually don't like to go out and try to make that happen, because I think what's plaguing a lot of horror movies recently, I'm sure you've noticed, is that everything's got to begin with a tragedy. Everyone has to have lost a spouse, a child. I think, well, I don't know if I like the arc of that situation, but to make a character recognizable, everyone's got issues. Everyone's got something. So those things just naturally come out when I start writing the characters. I wasn't actually even aware of any dominant motifs like that before you mentioned them. I wonder if I made like a spreadsheet, if I'd really start to see, like, here's the names of the characters. That's column A. Column B is what they're struggling with outside of the horror. That would be an interesting spreadsheet to look at. But I guarantee you that I've never gone out of my way to generate sympathy or empathy in that way. It's just life on Earth. I think that's what it is. And trying to create a real character. Here we go. Aging mother in the old folks' home that you're worried about and you can't get to see, or addiction to pain medication or body dysmorphia. There's just so many things to step on out there in the world.
Yeah. Life on Earth, the scariest horror story imaginable.
That no one wants to listen to, exactly.
Yeah. Also, if you do ever make that spreadsheet, I hope you send it to me, because I just want to see the organized calculus of tragedy throughout your stories.
Yeah, I think it needs to be a quilt, actually. I'm going to write this down.
Yes, please do. Please do. I want that. What is, if there is one, what could you put a finger on a personal favorite episode of the podcast of yours? Which one that you felt the most proud of?
For whatever reason, I can almost never listen to anything I've done unless many years go by, about 4 or 5 years before I can actually pop something in and let me give that a little whirl again, just for old time's sake. I was kind of, first of all, I like all the stories in general that really involve the elements, where you feel the elements. The winter stories, I think of them as, or when the rain, storm, sleet, anything where you can hear and feel things. I was kind of digging the story. It was called 12 Tiny Cabins recently, because I thought, I like this because we get some good old-fashioned first-person ghost storytelling in a long stretch, but then we also get some fun themes in there. It's about more than just a guy who went through a nasty thing. There's a little bit of misdirection in there. There's a little bit of personality disorder. There's some regrets. There's some wistfulness. There's some mistrust. So I think that one's kind of climbing the charts for me recently, in my memory, that is. If I sat down and listened to it all the way through, really paying attention, I would see nothing but the flaws. But yeah, I do like the ones where you get good old-fashioned ghosts with additional stuff.
Yeah. Speaking of specific episodes, and I'm glad you did have a specific answer, I'm going to test your memory a little bit more. I'm curious about the origins of some of the stories that I've heard on the podcast, because there are some that just kind of ring a specific, I feel like this came from a specific scenario, and I'm wondering if I could hear about the origins of some of those episodes. One such episode was the episode Undead, a story that is aptly named perhaps, but if you do hear the title of that, you would kind of get a predisposed stereotype perhaps, or maybe just, a notion of what the story's content would be. But in my opinion, it's probably my favorite zombie tale ever told. I think it takes it from an angle that I did not see coming. I don't think anybody could have seen coming, depicting essentially a zombie apocalypse through the lens of pre-existent cinema. And there's a lot going on in it, and it just kind of made me wonder what made you want to put that kind of spin on the zombie story.
Well, it might be fun to know that when I originally wrote that story many years ago, it was in the form of a series of movie reviews. Oh. I used to like reading Roger Ebert's video guide, because he was such a good writer. Yeah. So Undead was in the format of 8 or 9 film reviews complete with starred ratings as you progress through the story. And I remember it's one of the very few stories I've ever tried to submit to publication. I remember the response was just like, what are you doing? This format, no, this doesn't work. So I'm like, okay. But that's kind of where that came from. Now, one of my favorite movies of all time is the original 1978 Dawn of the Dead. So I've always had a thing for zombies. And one thing I've always been kind of miffed by is very few filmmakers want to make zombies as a genuine horror film. I think we've gotten really into the action mode of zombies, gore plus action. The rise of the fast zombie, which to a purist like me, it's just the worst possible thing. So I thought, I want slow zombies, and I want to focus on just one. So that's how I kind of started. But the format was kind of based on a hybrid of my enjoyment of Roger Ebert's movie guide and thinking of all those times I watched Dawn of the Dead. It just kind of came together.
Okay. That's movie reviews was not the answer I was expecting there.
Yeah, if you listen to it, you can kind of see how easily it breaks off in nice chaptered sequences of a series of movie reviews.
Yeah, I guess I could see that. Another such story is the story Staircase, one that gave me the creeps personally, and kind of had a lot of kind of the uncanny valley in an auditory way, and spoke to me there. This story, to briefly summarize for those listening, essentially telling the story of a somewhat deranged woman coming almost from nowhere and coming to the doorstep of somebody who has just the previous night heard something climbing up his staircase, or at least someone walking up his staircase, and did not find them and found his front door open. Then the next day, this woman comes and visits and says that she wants to start a neighborhood watch committee. Things quickly go downhill and quickly get creepy. And it struck me as both creepy but also odd, and I'm wondering where that fusion of vibes came from.
That was written at a time when I was I actually sat down and tried to make myself a list of all the primal fears that I personally suffer from. But I ran out of paper because I thought, well, what I want to do is write stories about those and then stick to those. And Staircase just happened, I think, to roll in 2 or 3 of the big ones. First, we have the sound in the middle of the night, classic. Then to me, it's also of being in a room with someone, a stranger, and realizing in that one moment that they are not who you think they are. That to me has always been it's a very, very creepy feeling. Then of course we put in something as simple as suddenly finding yourself living in a house that's way too big for you, and then hearing the sounds that you normally would not, and being concerned for the spaces that you would normally not. So yeah, that was one of the few. Sometimes I do sit down with a goal in mind for a story that doesn't have much to do with the plot as it is with certain fears I want to describe. And that's how Staircase came to be.
I can hear that. I could definitely hear that. The moment of her reaching her hands up near her head, and saying, "I'm the thing from your staircase." Yeah, that definitely got to me. You get points there.
Yeah, it's funny. There's been a few different people who've made short films of Staircase, and they all, it's fun. They all do that moment differently, that hand in the air moment, and it's always good. It's always just like, oh, that's to see that. Yeah. It's just, oh man, that's something I just don't need to see.
Yeah.
But again, that's a primal fear, kind of to think that the thing that is pursuing you is making light of it, even, that somehow makes it even scarier. Like, oh, isn't it funny that I'm showing you this deep down, that you really should fear me, but let's have a little fun with it. Don't you find it fun? Yeah, that's just nasty.
yeah, no doubt at all. One more story, and then I promise I'll stop grilling you on the individual episodes. One more that struck me as curious and felt like there might be a story behind was the episode Guest. Another incident of an abandoned location, in this case a hotel, where a 16-year-old kicked-out kid by his stepfather finds this sort of strange, possibly foreign man who he discovers a bit more about the backstory about inside the hotel, but someone who also behaves very strange, almost infantile, and also carries a McDonald's hamburger. And it was all, again, curious and at the same time frightening, but also very intriguing. And so I'm wondering where that one may have come from.
That, and say something like the story called Moonkeeper, sort of came. An old habit of mine was to go for long walks, overland hikes, often winding up places that I probably shouldn't be in the middle of the night with my backpack and just going home. Nothing crazy, nothing really dangerous, but I eventually stopped because the world at night is just so creepy. And it's because of human beings. It has nothing to do with anything else other than the human factor. There's nothing more beautiful than walking along at 1 a.m. Over an open field. It's amazing. Or down a country road, on the side of the country road. I loved it. I loved doing that. But there were so many instances where I got bad vibes from other people. Eventually, these things just caught up to me. They all gathered in my brain, and out came a story like Guest, which is about the fear of not knowing exactly where you're going to sleep that night. You're young and alone and afraid, and there's a building which looks that you shouldn't go there, but you're running out of options. One day I hope to actually have the guts again to go out and start walking around at night, because I have great memories, even though there are a lot of spooky ones too. But I doubt I ever will. I think I've passed that phase. It's not going to happen again.
Yeah, well, I definitely don't blame you. A lot of that there's a distinctly urban element to a lot of these stories, and it interests me to hear you say that about the walking and about the kind of bright vision turned dark, because I do get that from a lot of stories. I do get that from Moonkeeper as well, which I think was the first episode I ever listened to, actually, and made it difficult for me to walk to my car, so there's that. And then
they never caught him, they never caught the Moonkeeper. Still out there. Just putting that up. Just saying.
Hey, you've made it difficult for me again. Thank you very much for that. So, like I was saying earlier, or I think I may have said in the introduction, or maybe it was just talking to you, Knifepoint Horror, it has influenced a lot of different podcasts, and a lot of people have come out saying that it was a big influence to them. One such as the Magnus Archives. Those of you listening may have heard of this show if you're a fan of anthology horror. Jonathan Sims has come out and said in public that Knifepoint Horror specifically inspired him in a lot of the writing. And with an influential show like this, I'm wondering what some of your personal influences are. Who is it that you feel like you find yourself pulling from the most?
Well, like everyone else that I know, my reading habits began to plummet over the years. So I think I've always been more influenced by movies, frankly, even in terms of the writing style. When I was a little kid, I used to go to my little typewriter that I had. It was a script typewriter, actually, typed in script, which, had no appeal whatsoever. And I would sort of novelize scenes from movies I had just watched. And that's how I sort of got things down. It sort of helped me to teach myself how to write. When I was young, I would read all the usuals, going to the library, just my little library card. I would pick out whatever was there. It was usually something like 100 great Victorian ghost stories, or 50 creepy tales from the 50s. And then it became, of course, your Stephen Kings, your Lovecrafts, your Poes. But as adolescence, there was a lot of horror movies. When they first started renting movies, I remember that time. I'm so old now. And of course, none of us could stop renting everything in the horror section, just everything. So I think I learned more from, the early John Carpenter, the early George Romero, that kind of thing, than any actual literature sometimes. I really think that. And it's almost been a matter of visualizing things in my mind and simply transcribing the cinematic images into words in a very primitive way.
I see.
But when I think I have dozens and dozens of just individual memories of finding little short stories in anthologies by so many authors that I can't even remember who they are anymore. It was great. To be in a headspace where I wasn't even paying attention to who the author's name was. Just, that's a cool story, and just moving on with no regard for who wrote it.
Yeah, I feel like that kind of puts you at the nexus of everything horror, because if you don't just pull from just from film, just from books, just from I suppose theater, then you can kind of transcend the form and get to the heart of horror as a genre. I could see the appeal in that for sure.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I've really fallen down on really knowing what's going on out there now. I've been stuck in my own brain for so long, just trying to chase down the next idea, that my experience of other people's horror it's fallen off a cliff, and that's not good. You want to keep the influences coming as far as you can, as long as you can in life. It just makes you better. So, bad on me.
I'll give you a pass on this one. Don't worry. One thing, listening to your show from the beginning, way back when after I'd heard a few standalone episodes here and there, and thought, okay, I'm gonna start from the top. Something I noticed is that in the beginning there are actually different narrators, or different voice actors, I'll say. who are telling these stories, and then at a certain point, it drops off, and it's just you narrating from that point on, with the occasional guest appearance. And I'm wondering why this is, and what that measures about where the show started, where it is now.
One of the things I wanted to find out, because I had a lot of fiction written, and I thought, well, I have slightly more horror stories than anything else, so let me try horror stories. And I thought, well, with all the fiction that I have, if this is going to work, I'm going to have to find people to read it, because it didn't even occur to me to do it myself. So one of the tests was of something like LibriVox.org, those great people who just read for free. They just read public domain works just for everyone's benefit. I wanted to see if I could find narrators who could do a capable job through something like that, or through something like voices.com. It was part of the experiment, and it worked. But at some point, I actually don't even remember why. It became a little bit of a struggle to find people. There's a lot of email communications back and forth. And I thought, well, why don't I just – it's going to be horror from now on. I think I'm going to just stick with the horror. So that the huge backlog of other fiction I'd written, I'm not going to get to that. That's going to be in a different category. So as long as I'm just doing horror stories, let me read a few myself. So that's how that started. It was half laziness, half a simple time-saving measure, really. It became quicker just to do it myself than to find new people.
I see. That's interesting. It's interesting that circumstance played such a role there, because I think, and this is something I've read like online, like on Reddit and other such sites, just that you have a voice that feels perfect for the craft, and feels to kind of capture the vibe of the show to an absolute T. And obviously, there is some voice acting involved there, of course. But it's interesting to hear you say that it was mostly circumstance that played the role there, because I think most listeners generally prefer your voice overall.
Yeah, I almost feel a sense of guilt when I put out something, multi-voice cast, but I really do enjoy those, because I know people. One of the things you do learn very quickly when you become a podcaster of any kind, which was fascinating to me to discover this, is how many people simply use your podcast to get to sleep at night. And I'm no different. I love the sound of that faraway voice, sort of in the dark, in the corner, and get a lot of emails from people saying, I don't take this the wrong way, but your voice, it just puts me right out. And I think that's terrific. I think that's great. It's like a soothing thing. So I'm very aware when I don't do a simple first-person monologue that I am disappointing a certain group of people, simply because the cadence is too different for them to drift off to. So I guarantee you, for your own podcast, you must have heard this already, that compliment of, it just feels like there's kind of someone in the room reading to me, and your voice just does it for me, and thank you. And I think it's a terrific thing. I have no problem hearing that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I will say the voice acting talent you do bring on certainly, I think, adds to the show. And for those that do fall asleep to the sound of your voice, I'm kind of wondering what their dreams end up being, because if you do listen to the words of the soothing voice, the words are much less comforting. So I have to wonder about that.
Yeah, I think we're psychologically protected, thank God, because could you imagine what our lives would be like if our dreams were so susceptible to the very last thing that we were experiencing before we nodded off? We'd all be total head cases. So I think there's like the shut-off valve. So you can listen to any of these horror podcasts, and you can fall asleep in the middle of one, and you will not be pursued in your dreams. Yeah. If Nightmare on Elm Street lied to us about anything, it's that. We do not have to fear that.
Yes. Some of the later episodes, I suppose relatively speaking, but some of the episodes that come in the latter half of the show, episodes such as Digs, episodes such as Transit, which is one of my personal favorites, they incorporate elements of audio beyond just the straight storytelling. They have kind of elements of found audio, kind of get a bit more experimental and with their sound design. I'm wondering if that's something that you see yourself sort of expanding on and exploring in the future, making more a part of the show than it was, sort of in the beginning when it was the more so just the straight read.
I would like to. I still think there's territory to be mined there. This few things are more riveting than an authentic piece of scratchy audio from whatever source, whether it's like a black box recording, in transit, or one thing I did recently called The Smoke Child, which was just basically you're hearing a recording of a lecture in a lecture hall. I would like to keep going down that road and see the episode we have. The story coming up in July will be another sort of experiment in found sound. There's an authenticity there that I just really enjoy. I really like hearing something like that when it's a challenge to do well. It's so easy to screw up, and I don't think I'll ever quite get the authenticity that I really want. But it's just, that part is just fun. Just fun, like, well, what else can I do with sound? Yeah.
Those listening better stay tuned for July, because apparently there's another one coming. Speaking of possible things coming up in the future, do you ever think you would end up exploring a different podcast, starting a new RSS feed and going in a different direction with it? If it's still horror, a different kind of story, maybe something long term, or have you had any other podcast ideas that you might get into in the future? I
have a little tiny notebook full of my podcast ideas because I still love the format. I think it's fabulous. I think it's creatively liberating. And it hasn't even been fully explored yet. All the things that can be done with sound. So I have a book full of ideas, and I seem to be afraid to pull the trigger on any one of them. Just when I think I've hit a wall, and I think, well, I can't. There's nothing else I can do with horror that's fun. I managed to have some other idea that gets me enthusiastic all over again. But I would like to do something non-horror related, maybe something just silly and funny. I tend to not really enjoy the process of writing very much, but I do find that I can do silly, ridiculous things and just have a good time in the actual writing of them. I don't know. I will definitely do something else someday. It's just a matter of when will the gas tank run out on horror? When will I stop being interested in a horror? It hasn't happened yet. It's been 12 years. I've had my periods where I think I'm retiring. I can't do anymore. But I don't know what's going on with my brain that it keeps feeding me this stuff.
Thus said every horror writer ever to write. I will say, you mentioned wanting to perhaps do something silly or funny. One thing I discovered fairly recently was your YouTube channel, where you get kind of a mix of, you get audio dramas, you get things that sound like they could have been on Knifepoint Horror, some things that are on Knifepoint Horror. And then there's a few videos in there sprinkled in, like on unfairness, or the video on horror, that do legitimately get a pretty big belly laugh out of me. And it is it's amusing to hear both something very funny and then in the next episode, next video, something very frightening come out of the same person. Where do those ideas come from? How much of your creative headspace do they occupy?
It's about 50-50, actually. I always have some idiotic idea for a kind of a goofball sketch or skit. I've done that almost all my life, but really at this point it's kind of, when I'm in between other longer stories, I just feel like to burn off a little creative energy in some little way. So what's something that you can make it'll only take a few hours, and I'll have like a finished product, and that's it. Then it basically something funny. Anything serious I will kind of agonize over and rewrite and despise as soon as I'm done with it. But funny things, to me, whatever perfectionist bone I have just disappears. I could care less. If it amuses me for 1 second, I will put it out there. And that's a good feeling. Every creative person should have something that they can just do, and they just don't mind the failure aspect at all. I think it's a very good thing to have. So that is me and comedy. Yeah, and of course, these ideas, I don't know where those ideas come from any more than I know where the horror ideas come from.
I can respect that mindset. They do feel spontaneous. They feel like they kind of just come, and they make me laugh every time. We were speaking earlier about stories having shared mythoses and how Knifepoint Horror doesn't have an explicitly declared universe. However, those who have listened to the show over a long period of time we'll spot certain, I guess what you could call Easter eggs, or certain reappearances. The character of Father John is one that comes to mind. And I'm wondering, these Easter eggs, how far in advance, are they planned? Are they ideas that kind of come to you on the fly, or are you trying to draw a very intentional parallel with them? What's going on there?
No, I'll tell you, what I like to do is just wait for those to naturally flip through my mind. And I like that happy accident, that sort of, okay, I can make a little intersection here, but I don't pursue them. That kind of feels inorganic and wrong to me. I don't want to suggest too much that there is a sort of universe, because one of the things that's kind of creepy to me is that none of these things will ever really connect, and these poor people are all by themselves and can't reach out to anyone else. So what I do is when I'm writing something will simply occur to me. I guess because there's like 90 of these stories now, it's starting to happen more and more often, that the little intersections with other characters just kind of pop up in my mind, and then I will pounce on them. That to me is fun. Devoting any creative energy to actually pursuing those little intersections, to me, feels a little bit cheaty and a little bit too manipulative. So I don't like to do it intentionally. So any kind of Easter egg you hear was almost entirely a spur-of-the-moment call.
That's interesting to me. I like the phrasing of the word happy accident. I feel like that kind of states it well, because, you could take a writer like Lovecraft who, does have a specific universe and a shared mythology to his stories. But you kind of have to buy into it all at once. You have to be invested in it for the duration of that mythos. And so the happy accident of being tied together just by strings of spontaneity, I like that thought. Yeah,
the happy accident is something that I want to get more into. I used to outline my stories very, very carefully, and I find myself doing more a thing where I'm just kind of picking my way through it as I go. And I find that by doing that, that's how the happy accidents come. That's how the weird plot twists and characters that would not have occurred to me if I had really planned for them come. And it's just part of the creative boredom, trying to surprise myself, trying to be surprised always. Happy accidents. I live for them, love them. I would be this would get very tiring very quickly if I didn't screw up a lot or really misjudge what I'm doing. Because that's when things kind of get exciting, because you fall down a little wormhole, like, how am I going to get out of here? And that's when the cool ideas really start.
One question that I like to ask all podcasters who I interview, and it's very open-ended, but I feel like there's a lot of discussion material to it, and is that, what do you see for the future of podcasting?
Well, I think it's going to be a struggle to keep this very independent bootleg spirit alive, simply because marketing will start to play more and more a part of the podcast that we see when we go searching for something. It'll become probably a little bit Googleized, where if I want to discover a new horror podcast, well, it's going to show me only certain ones unless I start really digging. So that's what I kind of worry about, because when you remove the visual, though, it's still I still see it will be kind of like a pirate thing for a long time. If people start getting really experimental, I would like to see more truly WTF podcast concepts. Like when you read the description, like, what? They're doing what on this podcast? Really, really artsy. There's have to be some barrier breakers out there. I would like to see that, both in terms of the topics and the sound design and the production. So there's so much room to go, I think. But I think we have to have a few people try some bizarre things and fail miserably. But failing in such a big way that it gets noticed by other creators who say, you know what, they had a really great idea there. There's a seed of something, much like the great art movements in history. The first guy to just draw a big orange triangle, somebody had to be the first person to try that and try to get away with it. So podcasting, I think, is going to need that same sort of experimentation. And we'll see what happens. So I'm hoping I will live to see some true nuttiness, some real pirate radio podcasting nuttiness hit the airwaves.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think you really hit the nail on the head there, so to speak. Okay, so we have covered a lot of different territory today. We've gone through the histories of Knifepoint Horror. We've addressed horror and podcasting together and apart. And I'm going to end this interview like I end all my interviews, with a question that is a bit more lighthearted, but I feel no less interesting. And you, Soren Narnia, pancakes or waffles?
Man, I've been on a pancake binge recently, but I have found that there's only a certain kind of pancake I like. I like the nice kind of thick, dark brown, moist pancake. If it's too light, I'm out. I find I can have more reliability with waffles, and more specifically, Belgian waffles. I've never had a bad Belgian waffle. Pancakes, there's too much artistic leeway in a pancake. There's too much, maybe this will be the greatest pancake ever, or maybe it'll just be the sponge. So I'm going to say the Belgian waffle. Also, of course, you get the joy of putting a little bit of butter in each square and a little bit of syrup in each individual square. So it's more of an interactive thing to me. So if I have to make the call, I'm going to call waffles. And if I get hate mail, then you know what? I'm just going to have to deal with it.
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of diehard pancake fans out there, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to ally myself with you. I think the waffle is going to be the more structured, the more exciting venture. They have little syrup.
See, if we fuse our passions for these waffles together, then we can begin to make people understand that there is only one way.
Yes.
So we'll talk later about that, but we should get on that.
This is how the next cult begins. All right, then. All right, folks, there you have it. Soren Narnia chooses waffles. And for those of you who have listened to this, thank you very, very much. If you have enjoyed anything you've heard here and you haven't heard Knifepoint Horror, you have got to get your life back into pieces, out of pieces, into whatever. Get yourself together and go listen to that show. It's a fantastic, fantastic piece of art, and easily one of my favorites there is. So those of you who are perhaps familiar with Soren Narnia but new to me, my name is CSW. I create a podcast called INCARNATION READ that you have been listening to a bonus episode of. Thank you very much for tuning into this. Thank you very much for tuning into Knifepoint Horror if you have, and you should. Hope to see you guys in the next episode.